Hello, my fellow Trollops. If you have been hooked in, this is all in participation of Steve Donoghue's read-along of Phineas Finn. Phineas Finn by Anthony Trollope. Steve Donoghue has roped us in for a headlong rush on our unruly steed. Well, no, it's Trollope. It's not an unruly steed. Of reading Phineas Finn, Phineas Finn, Phineas in the month of January, kind of in the three last weeks of January, which I've chosen to do it on Librivox just because that's the way I can get the reading in. If you do Librivox, it's a good idea to get some background reading in somewhere, whether you just look up parliamentary reform and basically kind of go through the reform acts. That's definitely what forms the backdrop of Phineas Finn, a Irishman who gets pulled in by by his friend and what he thinks is a potential love interest in Lady Laura Standish to stand for Parliament and abandon a legal career, much against the advice of his much more sensible tutor, Mr. Lowe. What he doesn't, and he stands for it. He basically gets elected in what's amounts. I think it's a rotten borough, basically something that's, it doesn't take too many votes, that you can get yourself elected to Parliament with little expense, because there's not that many people to snow. So yeah, I would recommend definitely doing a little bit of research, background information on that. I didn't, and there's a couple of things that by the end of the 25 chapters I went, oh, I should really get up to speed on that. And of course I found at the end of my world classics, there is indeed, after I did all my research of like Wikipedia as my friend, there's a whole little section here which is the Second Reform Act, the 1866 to 67. Talking about how this was, the Reform Act to enfranchise a lot more of the adult males in England. And that's the big strength of England during this time, is it was actually the most liberal of countries, small L liberal at this point, liberal of countries, where more and more people were enfranchised, that the king wasn't, the absolute monarchy, was constrained by the parliament. And indeed, during the course of this book, there's basically, it's the Second Reform Act, which I think what it does is it immediately doubles the size of the male voting population, and then further does. So I think you basically, if you're a tenant with like £10 per annum, which I don't know what that qualifies as, but basically a lot more people get the vote. And of course, actually, it was done rather cynically by the Conservatives at the time to help them get more elected, but it ends up backfiring on them. But that's the sort of the backdrop to this. And Phineas Finn indeed is going in as a liberal, so definitely as someone a Whig, a liberal, someone who is wanting to do reform, though he's actually very against the ballot, which it's funny. It's one of these things like, oh, the ballot. And I'm going through the book and it's like, suddenly the penny drops. Oh, by ballot, he's against the secret ballot, which is something that, it seems very odd to modernize, of like, so little Lord, what's his name, doesn't know that his tenants are voting for the radicals to, turf him out. They can't unduly influence the vote by knowing, like, what how their underlings are voting. So yeah. So it is worth to get a little bit of a background knowledge. I think I kind of got myself generally up to speed. I mean, I'm a Canadian, so I kind of get the idea of sort of parliamentary democracy and stuff like that, and kind of ins and outs of Parliament. It's semi-similar to how things get run in Canada as a Canadian. Though, still trying to keeping things like, okay, there's the Conservatives and there's the Whigs, who are the kind of the liberals. However, even within, as I said here, Phineas Finn as a liberal is still against the secret ballot, which okay, I guess we'll hear about this. He's going to have a speech coming up in the next chapter. I'm discussing today chapters 1 through 25, and then I figured I'd get all my thoughts down. It's Friday today, but I figured I'd get all my thoughts down so I can then go on and try and get ahead of Steve. Oh, no one can ever get ahead of Steve. So yes, Phineas, he gets he's rather a spoiled, he seems to be kind of a rather spoiled, kind of pampered young man who gets kind of puffed up by his adoring mother and daughters. Indeed, there's an interesting kind of thing within this book of you get the sense of women who are not enfranchised are sort of living their lives vicariously through men like Phineas, who like they're like, oh, he's gonna be the one who does stuff, and we're gonna kind of live our lives through him, and you get that sense through Lady Laura Standish, initially Lady Laura Standish, that she's. Because at first I thought, oh, she's just manipulating him. She's being mean to him in a way. But no, actually, I think she's doing it out of a good-hearted sense. But it's sort of her sense of, I love politics and I want to get more and more into politics, and encouraging some guy who really shouldn't be going into politics. This is not the point in his career. He's a young man. He hasn't established himself. When you go into Parliament, you're not making any money. So it's like, it's really not a good idea. It doesn't seem like it's going to be a very good idea for him, or it's going to work out well. And he's got all this like, oh, Lady Laura Standish loves me. And like, he's a son of a doctor, of a humble kind of Irish doctor, which is like, he's within his own small community. It's probably, he's a bigger thing, but in the larger world, he's like nothing. He's young and he's impoverished and he's just barely, and Phineas is just is living off of his father's thing, and his tutor advises him not to do this. This is not the time to do it. You're still established as a career, and then you go into politics. Once you've gone into politics, you're not going to be able to be a lawyer, and it's going to complete. You can't be a starting lawyer and kind of get yourself established this way. And indeed, he abandons being a lawyer entirely. It's something like, oh, I don't really like this, and he kind of likes the gambly kind of the thrill of politics. You can see that he's very much got that plugged in. So maybe he'll be able to claw his way. I guess we're going to find out. I love Mr. Bunce in this book, who is his landlady's husband, who is this. He's a clerk, and he's a kind of trade unionist, and he's like, he doesn't think much of Phineas. It's like, he's living off of his father's things. He's just going to become a creature to the thing. We shouldn't be extending, like, he gets behind on his rent, and like these people, Bunce and Mrs. Bunce, they have to basically scrape by. She goes without food so she can feed her children because this not rich idiot isn't paying his rent. It's like it has actual things on them, and I really sympathize with Mr. Bunce of going like, why are we indulging this young guy? He's like, pay his rent on time, be responsible, be a responsible person versus kind of sponging off of us. And there's that, whereas Mrs. Bunce is like, oh, he's an MP now, and it's like, wow, and oh, isn't this, it's like, it's like, oh, this, and it's kind of like this entitlement thing, which I don't know if it's entitlement. It's just like, oh, I'm a handsome young guy who's an up and comer, and I get away with all this crap. And he also makes stupid mistakes, like he has a friend who asks him to sign a loan, and it's like, oh, it'll be completely fine, which of course immediately he's going to be on the hook for all the money, but he kind of goes along with it because he wants to be agreeable. He wants to be the agreeable Phineas. And so Phineas he's one of these characters where it's almost like in a romantic comedy, Phineas would be the go-between character. He would be the friend. He seems at this point, he is always the friend. With Lady Laura Standish, who becomes Lady Laura Kennedy, he's like, he doesn't have a hope with her, and she goes off and she marries Robert Kennedy, who is this rich Scottish fellow who's I think his father actually came from nothing, but now he's super wealthy. And of course, Lady's like, well, that's who I'm going to marry because I don't have any money, so that's who I need to marry, whether I love him or not. And there's this, and it turns out, yes, Robert Kennedy is this very dour, the prototypical dour Scotsman who's like, no novels on Sundays. Oh, he's no good for it. But she's married him now, and you wonder if this is this sowing the seeds of, oh, she's going to now wander off to someone else, or is she going to kind of come back to Phineas? I don't know. Phineas just doesn't seem like that really anyone's going to take him that seriously, but I guess we'll see as we go along. I've definitely, as much as actually Phineas is a nice guy, he's a character, he also seems quite hapless. and his stuff. And then his next thing is Lady Laura uses him again to intervene because she has a brother, Lord Chiltern, who is a brute, is a alcoholic, gambling brute who's basically been kind of pushed beyond the kind of the pale of society. His father won't really talk to him much anymore. He's not marriage material. He's asked this wealthy heiress, Violet Effington, to marry him a couple of times, and they know each other from childhood, where they actually were great. They were great, very close friends, and they had one of these it's kind of the prototypical childhood thing of, oh, let's marry each other when we're older, and it's like, but he turns into this kind of violent alcoholic brute who's like no good. And it's like, and Violet Effington is very much like, why would I marry this guy? Why would I marry this guy? Of course, and Laura, in the kind of this pattern of the females in this book, is like, oh no, you have to indulge him. You have to support him, and you'll change him. And it's like Laura's really like, I'm going to sacrifice my friend Violet just to help my brother, but it's going to completely screw her up. But she's doing, it's one of these things of I think Trollope is really good at, is having these really nice people do terrible things to each other from the nicest and the most pure kind of motives. But it's going to mess everybody up. It's terrible. And Lord Chiltern, horse killer. Let's just all keep that in mind, that his brutishness is at the chapter, I think it's 24. It's like, yeah, he rides a horse that shouldn't be ridden, and he jumps over a thing, and he smashes it into a thing. It breaks its arm, it breaks its leg. He breaks a couple of his ribs and stuff like that, and they have to shoot it because he's an brutish ass who doesn't really give a shit. This is like, I might as well have been riding the couch. He doesn't give a crap about this horse. Oh, and they're hunting foxes and stuff like that. But in some ways I feel less sorry for the fox, because the fox is running, and even though the fox is equally as doomed as the horse. It's interesting. I don't know if there's going to be a switch here in on the very famous kind of English sentiment towards animals, and this I think maybe is a part of it. Is, yeah, he's just, he kills this horse, and of course in the next chapter the women are like, oh, how is Lord Chiltern? Is he all right? Oh boy, oh, I'm glad you weren't hurt either, but oh, poor Lord Chiltern. And Violet's really concerned for him because, oh, there's the yearnings there for the bad boy, and it's just like, he just horse killer. Lord Chiltern, horse killer. God. And in the final chapter, we've got, do I have they have some, which I believe are just like the original, original illustrations, but you get Mr. Bunce getting pinched by the police here because of a protest. For the reform bill, where this is sort of the chapter when, oh yeah, this is a parliamentary novel, and we're into the politics. You shouldn't just get into all the kind of the love triangles. There's the backdrop here is like in French, we're reforming Parliament. We're actually gathering more people in these lower classes who people like Phineas are kind of riding on, are gathering more political power, and they're agitating. He's a member of a union. Miss Bunce is like, well, why are you pissing your money down that? And it's like, because at some point this is going to be a movement. This is going to be something that we're going to be able to kind of evince change. And even while I may not have like resentments, Mr. Bunce may not have resentments against his direct employer. It's like, well, I'd like to be paid more. I would like, better conditions. And this is very much, you can see that kind of bubbling up there. And it's funny because he gets pinched. And Trollope makes a point of saying that Mr. Bunce gets pinched, not because he was like rough and like, bashed a policeman or something like that. He talked about his rights, which it's like Trollope's like, yeah, if he just like knocked over a policeman, that would have been one thing. The policeman would have knocked it off. But when he started talking about his rights, habeas corpus, that's when the police went, oh, we're snatching you. You're a real troublemaker, because that is the real trouble. That is the real thing of change at this point in this book. So yes, I'm really getting into, obviously, the first 25 chapters of Phineas Finn, which I would totally recommend. It's very interesting. I've read a couple of Trollopes before. I have not read Can You Forgive Her, which I guess I'm going to have to go back to. I missed that Steve read. But I've read Barchester Towers, and I've read Dr. Thorne. Dr. Thorne especially, I think, was a much more sleepy, measured pace of a book. And these Phineas Finn is a little bit more fast-paced, a little bit more urban in its feel. And I mean, maybe it's also because I've just come off a lot of nonfiction, and I'm like, oh, fiction again, oh God. But it's definitely got a bit more of a pace to it, which I'm really enjoying. So yes, those are my brief 15 minutes of thoughts, because it's like, for me, 15 minutes brief thoughts on the first 25 chapters of Phineas Finn. And I'm really glad that Steve forced me to pick this up. And I would recommend, if you're wanting to kind of if you don't have a lot of time but you want to get into it, to try the Librivox. They have the readers so far have been all very, very good. No mumblers or anything like that. I would recommend that you do a little bit of research, just doing like the Reform Act of 1867, and just sort of general kind of a little things of politics. You don't need too much, because Trollope actually does fill you in on a lot of stuff like that. But that, yeah, the ballot is the secret ballot, which is just still boggles my mind as a modern person, that there'd be any question why you wouldn't want to give people a secret ballot, a private way of being able to vote, so that they weren't going to get pressured by their bosses or by their lords. And stuff like that. So yes, I'm looking forward to the next chapters, and I'm looking forward to hearing about Steve's comments about it, and probably him giving a much better, fuller kind of background and context to all this stuff, as I struggle to piece it all together. All right, more videos later.